My name is Esther Carter. I am 27 years old. And on the day I gave birth to my first child, my marriage ended in the most unthinkable way. My husband served me divorce papers in the delivery room. Stay with me while I continue my story. Kindly take a moment and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you. Now back to my story. I remember the hospital's sterile scent, the beeping of machines, the low murmur of nurses moving about. It was early afternoon, and the winter sunlight spilled weakly through the blinds. My contractions had grown stronger, each wave stealing my breath for a few seconds before retreating. Chloe Barnes, the nurse assigned to me, stood at my bedside, monitoring the baby's heart rate and offering a soft smile whenever I groaned through the pain. Peter, my husband of 8 years, stood near the corner of the room, not by my side where I expected him to be. His phone screen glowed faintly in his hands, and he typed quickly, glancing at me only occasionally. I told myself he was nervous. He'd always been bad in crisis situations. But a small, uneasy knot had begun to tighten in my stomach. When Dr. Grace Whitman stepped in to check on me, I clung to her presence. She had a calm authority that made me feel safer. "You're progressing well, Esther," she said gently. "We're almost there. Almost there." Those words should have been a comfort. Instead, I noticed Peter slip his phone into his jacket pocket, his expression unusually tense. Then, without meeting my eyes, he reached inside his leather briefcase. First, I thought he might be taking out a water bottle or maybe a snack, something to help pass the time. But when he pulled out a thin manila envelope and held it in both hands like it weighed more than bricks, my chest tightened. "Esther," he began, his voice low but steady, "I need you to look at something." I frowned, my breath hitching as another contraction began to build. "Peter, not now." "It's important," he interrupted, stepping closer. He placed the envelope on the hospital tray beside my bed, pushing aside the ice chips Chloe had brought me. "What is this?" I asked, already sensing the cold dread before my fingers even touched the paper. He swallowed. "Divorce papers." The room seemed to tilt, the sound of the fetal monitor suddenly louder in my ears. Chloe's eyes widened, and even Dr. Whitman paused in the middle of jotting down notes. I stared at him, my hand frozen halfway to the envelope. "You're joking," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm not," he replied. "I think it's best we end things now before we bring this baby into all of this." Contraction hit full force, a crushing wave that ripped a cry from my throat. Chloe rushed to help me breathe through it, her hands firm on my shoulder. My vision blurred with tears, both from pain and from the brutal sting of his words. When the contraction passed, I turned to him again. "You waited until now?" My voice was hoarse. "While I'm in labor. You couldn't wait until after?" Peter's jaw tightened. Dragging it out wouldn't make it any easier. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but another contraction surged through me, stealing my strength. He stepped back, almost as if he feared my touch. Chloe shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but he didn't meet her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the physical agony, I felt something shift, an anchor breaking loose. The man I thought I knew, the man I had loved, was a stranger now. Dr. Whitman tried to keep the focus on my delivery, encouraging me to stay calm, to concentrate on the baby's arrival. But my mind was split in two, half enduring the rhythm of pain, half replaying his words in an endless loop. When Chloe leaned closer to adjust the monitor, she whispered, "Ignore him for now. Focus on yourself and your baby. We'll deal with him later." Her kindness was a lifeline. I gripped it tightly, pushing Peter's presence to the edge of my awareness. But every so often I caught glimpses of him standing there, his gaze darting between me and the papers, as if he couldn't wait for me to sign. It was more than betrayal. It was cruelty sharpened to a fine point. The hours blurred after that. Between contractions, I tried to remember who I was outside of him, outside of this suffocating moment. I thought of the quiet work I had been doing for months, building something in secret, something he knew nothing about. The thought of it was like a small ember in my chest, glowing faintly even in the middle of my pain. Peter wouldn't know about the contract I had closed just a day earlier. He wouldn't know that while he was planning his escape, I was sealing a deal worth more than anything we'd ever dreamed of. That ember kept me breathing, kept me from breaking apart completely. As the final stage of labor began, I let the doctor and nurses guide me. Peter stayed in the corner, his phone back in his hand, thumbs moving quickly. I didn't ask who he was texting. I already suspected. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, it was the purest sound I had ever heard. Chloe placed the tiny bundle on my chest, and for a moment the world narrowed to the warmth and weight of my child. Peter didn't come closer. Instead, he left the envelope on the tray, untouched. Then, as quietly as he could, he slipped out of the room. I didn't watch him go. I had something far more important in my arms. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not for me. And not for Peter Carter. Peter didn't return to my hospital room that night. Not while I nursed our newborn daughter. Not while Chloe quietly adjusted my four. Not even when Dr. Whitman came back to check on me and offer congratulations. He was simply gone. It might have hurt more if I didn't already sense the reason. That ember of suspicion I'd been carrying for weeks, the late nights at the office, the unexplained weekend trips, was now an open flame. The next morning, Ethan Miller, my business partner, arrived with flowers and an awkward smile. Ethan had been the only one to know about my pregnancy from the start, the only person I could talk to without feeling judged. He took one look at my pale face and frowned. "Where's Peter?" he asked, setting the bouquet on the table. I gave a humorless laugh. "Probably with her." Ethan's brows knitted together. "Her?" I didn't want to say the name, but it slipped out before I could stop myself. Vanessa Reed. Tasted bitter. I remembered the first time Peter had mentioned her, just a friend from the gym. Then she was someone who needed help with a startup idea. Later, a client who needed advice. But the way he'd smiled when talking about her, I should have trusted my instincts. Ethan didn't look surprised, which told me more than I wanted to know. "Esther," he hesitated, then lowered his voice. I wasn't sure if I should say anything before, but Vanessa's been seen with Peter around the city. Dinner. Drinks. Not exactly discreet. The sting was sharp but not unexpected. So that's why he was in such a hurry to get me to sign the papers. He's moving on to her. Finn's jaw tightened. Apparently, he's already told people they're getting married as soon as the ink dries. I felt my pulse thudding in my ears. Married. While I was still lying in a hospital bed with stitches and bruises from childbirth, he was somewhere planning a wedding with his mistress. Chloe entered just then to check on me and the baby. She caught enough of the conversation to glance sharply at Ethan, then at me. "You don't need to waste your energy on him right now," she said firmly. "Men like that, they make their own downfall." But my mind was already working. Not in anger, though there was plenty of that, but in calculation. Peter thought he had all the power, that I was too broken, too blindsided to act. He didn't know what was coming. Later that afternoon, while the baby slept and the ward was quiet, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages. There it was, the confirmation email from my attorney, dated yesterday morning. My deal with a major Canadian tech distributor had officially closed. Contract was worth $5 million. Peter hadn't known I'd been building my own company for the past 2 years. I'd kept it separate from our joint accounts, never once asking for his input or approval. My work was my own, and so was the reward. When Chloe came back with dinner, she found me smiling for the first time since yesterday. "You look like someone who knows a secret," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, I do," I murmured. "And I can't wait for Peter to find out." That evening, Peter finally appeared. He stood at the doorway for a moment, his face carefully neutral. "How's the baby?" "Perfect," I said, not looking at him for long. He stepped inside but didn't come close. "Have you thought about the papers?" I kept my tone even. I'll look them over when I get home. He frowned, clearly not happy with my answer. Esther, But his phone buzzed in his pocket and I watched him glance at it, then away quickly. A flicker of guilt, or maybe anticipation, crossed his face. I didn't need to guess who it was. Go on, I said softly. Vanessa's waiting. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he recovered. It's not. Don't bother, I interrupted. Just sign whatever you need to sign for her. I'll handle my side. He left without another word, the scent of his cologne lingering in the room for a moment before fading. As soon as he was gone, I cradled my daughter closer. She was so small, so unaware of the chaos around her. I whispered a promise against her soft hair, one I intended to keep. Peter Carter thought he'd written the ending to our story. He didn't realize I was already drafting a new chapter. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One cold Thursday afternoon, Peter called out of the blue. His voice had that forced warmth people use when they're about to ask for something. Esther, I was wondering if we could meet. Just for coffee. I almost laughed. Coffee? Since when do we do coffee, Peter? I just think it would be good to talk without lawyers, he said quickly. You know, for Grace's sake. Grace's sake. The same Grace he barely acknowledged in the hospital. Till curiosity tugged at me. Something in his tone suggested he was trying to manage damage control, and I wanted to see why. We agreed to meet at Harrington's, a cozy spot downtown with worn leather chairs and the faint scent of cinnamon in the air. When I arrived, Peter was already there, dressed in his navy suit, the one he used to wear for big business pitches. He stood as I approached. You look good, he said a little awkwardly. I am good, I replied, taking my seat. For a moment, we exchanged polite conversation about Grace, her sleeping patterns, her weight gain. Then, almost as if he couldn't help himself, Peter leaned in. I wanted to explain about Vanessa. I lifted an eyebrow. You mean your fiancé? He flinched at the word. We're not officially engaged yet, but yes, it's serious. She's been very supportive through all this. All this, I repeated softly, letting the words hang. He cleared his throat. The thing is, Vanessa has this startup she's trying to launch. It's been harder than she thought. We've been looking for investors. I almost smiled. There it was, the real reason for the coffee. And you thought I might know someone? I asked. His eyes lit up. You've always been good with networking. I figured you could maybe connect us to one of your business contacts. I leaned back, watching him. This man, who had served me divorce papers during childbirth, was now sitting across from me asking for help, for his mistress. Well, I said slowly, you're in luck. I just closed a very big deal with North Point Technologies. His eyes sharpened instantly. North Point? The Canadian firm? That's the one, I said, casually stirring my coffee. They wired me $5 million last week. Color drained from his face. $5 million? Yes. For my company, Carter and Miller Design Solutions. You remember my little hobby. I couldn't resist the small edge of sarcasm. He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly recalculating everything he thought he knew. I didn't realize. No, I cut in. You didn't. You were too busy texting Vanessa during my labor to notice the life I was building without you. He looked down, the weight of my words landing squarely on his pride. Esther, I'm not investing in Vanessa's startup, I said flatly. I'm not connecting her to my contacts. And I'm certainly not going to save the man who tried to humiliate me in a hospital bed. The silence between us was thick, the cafe's soft background chatter suddenly very far away. Peter finally leaned back, exhaling slowly. I made a mistake, he said, but it sounded more like a confession to himself than an apology to me. I stood, picking up my bag. Yes, you did. And now you get to live with it. As I walked out into the crisp winter air, a sense of clarity settled over me. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the point where the power shifted entirely. Peter Carter had once believed he was my whole world. Now he knew he was just a chapter I'd already finished. Word travels fast in our circle, especially when it's about money or scandal. By the following week, it seemed everyone in our mutual social sphere knew about my North Point deal. Finn and I had been featured in a business magazine, my smiling face on the cover, holding a mock-up of our latest design. The headline read, "From startup to $5 million in 24 hours, Carter and Miller's remarkable leap." Peter didn't call, but Vanessa did. The number came through as unknown, but her voice was unmistakable, smooth, rehearsed, with an edge of panic under the surface. "Esther? This is Vanessa Reed." I let a beat pass before answering. "Vanessa? What a surprise." "I just wanted to congratulate you," she said, drawing out the word as if it hurt. $5 million. That's impressive." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone polite but cool. "I was actually wondering," she continued, "if maybe you'd consider meeting with me. I think our ventures could." "No," I said simply. "My ventures work just fine without yours." The silence that followed was delicious. She muttered something about just trying to be friendly and hung up. Finn found the whole thing hilarious. "She actually called you," he laughed when I told him. "They must be desperate." I didn't have to wait long for proof. 2 weeks later, I overheard a conversation between two acquaintances at a charity gala. Apparently, Vanessa's startup had burned through its seed funding. Investors were backing out. Rumor had it Peter had sold his share in one of his companies to keep her business afloat, only to watch it sink faster. The same week, Peter sent a formal request through our lawyers asking for a meeting to renegotiate settlement terms. My attorney advised against it. "You're in a position of strength, Esther. Don't give an inch." And I didn't. The divorce went through smoothly on my end. I kept my company, my earnings, and sole custody of Grace. Peter walked away with his share of the marital assets, but compared to what I now had, it was a fraction. The final time I saw him was outside the courthouse. He looked older somehow, lines around his mouth, his shoulders slightly hunched. Vanessa wasn't with him. "Good luck, Peter," I said as we passed. He gave a short nod, his eyes flicking away. As Grace and I settled into our new life, I realized how much lighter everything felt. Mornings were filled with possibility, not tension. Evenings were calm, not battles. My company was thriving, expanding into new markets, and for the first time in years, I felt entirely in control of my own story. Peter's name came up less and less. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers about his financial troubles, about how Vanessa had eventually left him for a wealthier investor. Each time, I felt no gloating, only confirmation of something I already knew. People reveal their true worth when they think you have none. Karma had done its work. Not in dramatic Hollywood explosions, but in slow, undeniable erosion. One spring morning, as I watched Grace taking her first wobbly steps in the living room, I thought about that hospital room, the sting of betrayal, the envelope on the tray, the man who thought he was ending my life. He hadn't ended it. He'd cleared the path for me to build something stronger. And that, I decided, was the real victory. Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe to this channel for more stories. Bye.